Hello everyone, this is Michael Taggart with Taggart Technology Services, and today we're going to be talking about 5 ways to beat phishing. These tips and approaches can be used both at work and at home to protect yourself and your school from phishing attacks. So, to get started, we're going to go over the basics of the field, like what exactly phishing is. Now, phishing is one of the oldest electronic attacks against an individual or an organization, and it's really been around for a long time. In fact, one of the classics of the genre, the Nigerian Prince email, has been around as long as 1992. And as you can see here, the idea of the Nigerian Prince email was that there was some son of a head of state, and they were undergoing trial, and if you were to help this individual access a certain amount of money, then some of that money would then be yours in return for that assistance. Now, of course, all of this was a scam, but this was a really good example of the kinds of things that phishing emails were originally trying to get people to do. And these were broad-based. They weren't necessarily targeted at any one individual. So, phishing is an email requesting information or action from the recipient. And another term you'll hear me use when we talk about the recipient is the target, because this is an attack, right? Phishing is not an authorized use of email. Now, phishing, which is an email-specific exercise, is part of a larger class of attacks against an organization or an individual known as social engineering. There can be in-person social engineering via phone, even by text message these days. But when we talk about phishing, we're really talking about email. Now, phishing often is not specifically scoped to a specific individual or an organization. It can be very broad-based, and hundreds or thousands of people can receive the same phishing email. When it is targeted at a specific individual or organization, that is known as spear phishing. And spear phishing is unique and distinct from phishing in that the spear phishing emails are going to make some attempt to disguise the identity of the sender, or at least try to make it seem like somebody internal to the organization or some individual that the organization would be receiving communications from. And then, more specifically, when important individuals, say for example a principal or head of school, is targeted by a phishing attack, that is known as whaling. And you'll see specific attempts to compromise accounts of individuals who would have access to sensitive information. Now, it used to be the case that spam, including phishing attempts, were everywhere in our inboxes, and it took a lot of effort on our part to distinguish the good email from the bad email. But of course, as our email systems have matured and we've moved on to use hosted email services like Gmail and Office 365, automatic filters can keep most of this at bay. The problem comes in when those filters don't catch everything. Because they catch so much, they can lull us into a false sense of security, when in fact we do still need to be vigilant against sophisticated, or even sometimes not that sophisticated, perhaps even overly simple phishing attacks that bypass the filters that that our email systems are designed to protect us against. The good news is that every phishing attack tends to have the same shape, the same anatomy. So we're going to go over what the anatomy of a phishing email is. Up first, usually the person who is attempting to phish you is going to be hiding their identity. So this is known as an identity spoof. They could be hiding the name, changing the name on the email address, or both. There will be some sort of appeal, and as we'll see later, an appeal is an attempt to use some sort of emotion to bypass your normal senses of safety and procedure to get what the attacker wants. And we'll see appeals to authority, urgency, and sympathy. There has to be a call to action in the phishing email. The attacker wants you to do something for them, whether it's click on a link that'll take you to a bogus login page to collect your information, download a file that contains malware, or even make some sort of personal action, right? Like purchasing gift cards, or perhaps wiring money, or even making account changes to somebody in the organization. And those actions, when there's something substantive to them, are known as a payload, and that is what the attacker is attempting to deliver, whether it's a malicious link, a file attachment, or that personal request. Now, before we get into the 5 steps, there is in fact a step 0 that applies at every stage in this process when we're trying to identify whether an email is a phishing attack. And that is to confirm, confirm, confirm. At any point during the process, if you have some suspicions about the sender of an email and whether or not it's legitimate, take some time to contact the purported sender through a different means other than email. Either a phone call or maybe a second email address that you have on file for them to confirm that they actually did send you the message that they claim to have in the suspected email. And that brings us into our step 1, which is to verify the sender. Now, as we said in step 0, you want to confirm through some other means that the sender is in fact who they claim to be. But we can actually use parts of the email to identify who the sender really is. So as we said in the anatomy of a phishing attack, there's going to be some sort of spoofing of identity going on, right? Disguising the identity of the sender. And it is a myth that hosted services like Gmail or Outlook or Office 365 can always detect spoofing. These services are really, really good at detecting spoofing when they are contacts that you know, that you've received email from before, especially if it's a new email address with the same name, or the attacker is trying to disguise the email address but isn't using the right mail servers. However, there are simpler attacks that can bypass human vigilance, and the technological solutions won't actually be aware that an attack is taking place. It's very easy to change the display name of an email address to whatever you want. So for example, here is an email that showed up in my inbox from, theoretically, Elon Musk. Very exciting. Looks like he has a business proposal for me. That's great. However, when I open the email and take a look past the display name to the email address itself, well, it turns out that I actually just sent myself this email from a different account, right? And it was easy for me to change the display name, but if I wasn't being careful, I would only have paid attention to the name of the person, not necessarily their email. So this requires us to be vigilant and take note of both the display name and the email address of the purported sender. And also note that this is in a Gmail account, and there's no warning at all that this isn't actually Elon Musk, because Gmail has no way of knowing who this person actually is. I wanted to take a minute specifically to talk about password reset requests. So this would be an email coming in from maybe Google or a social media account that asks you to reset your password for new security standards or something like that. And this would be sort of an appeal to authority, as we'll see later. The first thing to know about this kind of email is that you will never receive an unsolicited password reset request. So if you don't recall making a request to reset your password, ignore it entirely. And in fact, you might even want to take that moment to go manually change your password. But certainly never click on an unsolicited password reset link. And it's important to know that because login pages can look quite convincing, the fake ones that attackers will develop as their payload. Now, when there is a link to something, as we'll see in step 5, you want to check the payload by hovering over the link. Please never click on them. But if you were to, the danger is that a lot of these login pages can look very, very similar to legitimate login pages. So for example, here on the left is a fake login page created by an attacker to attempt to collect the username and password of an individual, whereas on the right is the legitimate Google login screen. And so as you can see, they look very, very similar. It's very easy to be fooled. So the best rule of thumb here is if you don't remember asking for a password reset for an account, don't click on a password reset link. Okay, step number 2, check for anomalous writing. The truth is that most phishers are poor writers, and I hope that stays true forever because it makes it much easier for us to identify bogus emails. Now, phishing attacks often originate from countries where English is not a primary language. So if the attacks are directed at an organization or an individual in the United States, it's kind of easy to notice some differences in spelling or syntax that might seem a little bit off, especially if the email is claiming to be from somebody in your organization. The moment that you identify some difference in the way that an email is being written, kinds of mistakes that you wouldn't expect from somebody, that should be a red flag for you to consider the email suspicious. And absolutely, so if an email doesn't read like the supposed sender wrote it, be careful, right? That takes us right back to the step 0 to confirm that the sender actually did send it. Step number 3 is to check for appeals. As we said before, an appeal is an attempt to override or bypass your normal procedures and your normal vigilance, right? So these are emotional attempts to try to get you to do whatever the attacker wants you to do. There are 3 kinds of appeals that we generally see. The first is the appeal to authority. This is when the attacker is trying to use some sort of power dynamic between you and the person they're claiming to be to get you to do whatever action the attacker wants you to do. An example might be your supervisor making a request or sending you a file to open. Because it's from somebody in kind of an authority position in relation to you, you might be more likely to take that action. Another example might be some sort of outside official or representative making a request, perhaps an auditor or something like that. And then, again, because of that power dynamic, you might be more likely to take that action. Next up is the appeal to urgency. So again, when things are critical, when things are an emergency, we tend to bypass our normal safety and precautionary measures. So this is when someone needs your help right away. Help, my car broke down. Help, I'm stranded in the Seychelles Islands or something, and I need you to wire money. First of all, when something is urgent, why is somebody emailing you? Often we'll see that after somebody is the victim of an attack like this, they also say something like, looking back, I'm not sure why this person would have contacted me anyway. And if you're feeling that way when you're reading an email that is attempting an appeal to urgency, that's a red flag for you. So an appeal to urgency, again, is something where you are feeling a need to help somebody right away. And rather than let that overwhelm you, and rather than let that bypass your normal safety and precautionary measures, go back to that step 0, confirm the identity of the sender. So we also have appeal to sympathy. This is a little bit different than appeal to urgency. It's not necessarily an emergency, but what it is doing is taking advantage of the fact that good people want to help each other, right? But the bad guys know that too and are going to prey on that instinct. So if you receive an email in which somebody's in a really bad situation and could use your assistance, it's not necessarily an emergency, but just some kind of help that they want. This is going to be an appeal to sympathy. And sometimes it's often paired with an appeal to authority. A really classic example of this is the gift card scam that we've seen going around, especially in independent schools recently. So here's a simple example of that, where somebody receives an email asking for you to go out and buy some gift cards for whatever reason. And people actually do this. And the gift cards are then transferred to the attacker. And of course, the person who theoretically sent the email never requested anything like that. So again, this is kind of an appeal to sympathy, right? Asking for some help. It's not necessarily an emergency, but when this also is claiming to be from a supervisor or somebody else in an a power and authority relationship to the recipient, then it's both appeal to sympathy and appeal to authority. So if you feel like you're being appealed to this way, if you feel like you're being asked or pushed to bypass your normal procedures, that should be a red flag for you, because people in your organization especially wouldn't do that. Step 4, check for calls to action. The appeal is only helpful if it gets you to do what the attacker wants you to do, and that's what the call to action is. So there are several kinds of calls to action, right? But the attacker needs you to take action to get what they want, right? Even if they've successfully convinced you that they are who they claim to be, it's not helpful unless you actually take action. So some examples of calls to action might be clicking on a link that leads to a fake login page, as we saw with the password reset request, downloading a file with embedded malware, purchasing gift cards like we saw in the last example, or even making changes to personal information inside the organization. And again, any of those specific requests should never be authorized by email anyway. So here are some calls to action from actual phishing emails that we've seen. So here we see the gift card request again. This is again an appeal to sympathy, but it is the call to action where you're trying to pick up a gift card. They're trying to get you to pick up a gift card for them, and then later the number will be transferred to the attacker. Here's an appeal to urgency. Here's that password reset, and again, the call to action is to reset that password. And here is going to be a payload of a file attachment, and a call to action of actually clicking on that thing and downloading it. And depending on who this is from, it might be an appeal to authority as well. All right, so the last piece is to examine the payload. The payload is the thing that the phisher wants you to do or to click on or download, right? And the first rule of negotiating suspicious emails is to never click links. Please don't click links, right? We can inspect links by hovering our mouse cursor over the link and checking the URL, but never click on it, because even though you're not necessarily downloading something, even just clicking on a link may compromise your system. Similarly, never download attachments from suspicious emails, because these downloads, once opened, are exactly what the attacker wants you to do. A couple to look out for specifically are .exe files. These are Windows executable files. These are programs. And especially if a .exe file attachment is claiming to be something like a slideshow or a movie, it's just a trap. This is an executable file that will install malware on your computer and potentially give an attacker direct access to your network. So avoid at all costs. Exe files should not be coming in via email. Similarly, and perhaps more alarmingly, we have to be careful with Microsoft Office files. So we're talking about Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and PowerPoint slideshows. These files, these applications have a built-in programming language that allow attackers to craft malicious software right in the Word document or the Excel spreadsheet. And so by downloading and opening one of these files, it executes that code, and again, your system is compromised. The best fix for this is to disable macros in Microsoft Office, and the link that shows you how to do that is linked in these slides. But the most important rule when we're talking about payloads is to accept nothing from untrusted sources. And if you're not sure if the source is trusted, once again, we go back to step 0, confirm the identity of the sender. All right, so let's go back and review what we've talked about so far, these 5 simple steps plus the 0th for how we keep ourselves safe from phishing emails. So step 0, of course, is confirm, confirm, confirm. Always make sure, if you're suspicious at any point in this process about the identity of the sender, that you confirm it through another means. Step 1 then is to verify the sender using the display name and the email address of the email as well as going back to step 0 and contacting the sender through, or the purported sender through another way. 2, check for anomalous writing. Any strange typos or syntax should raise flags for us. 3, check for appeals. If the email is asking us to emotionally bypass some of our safety and precautionary measures, then we should be suspicious of the email, especially when it's paired with a call to action, when the email is asking us to do something, download a file, click a link, or make some sort of purchase, or even change of record for the personnel. And then 5, of course, is to examine the payload. Let's see what it actually is. If it's a password reset link, we can hover our mouse over it to see if it actually goes to the place it claims to. But of course, we're never going to click on those links. We're never actually going to download them. At this point, if there is a payload, you would inform your IT staff about the email. All right, that about does it for the 5 easy ways to beat phishing. Thank you for watching. My name is Michael Taggart, and you can learn more about these kinds of services, including security training, risk assessments, security architecture and design, and solution development at taggart-tech.com. Thank you for watching.